Tonight's event is made possible in partnership with our fantastic partners at the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. I want to acknowledge them. And if you'd like more information about what they do and their upcoming events, please visit crspc.uchicago.edu. I will keep this brief, but I do want to let you know about a couple of upcoming events we have off-site and here at the Co-op. On August 26th at the DuSable Museum of African American History, we'll welcome Daryl DMC McDaniels. That's Daryl McDaniels from Run DMC, who will be discussing his just released memoir, 10 Ways Not to Commit Suicide, a memoir about his depression and the skills he found to help out with that. That's Friday, August 26th at 6:30, and you can RSVP. That's a free event. You can RSVP for off of our website. I also want to let you know that on September 13th, over at the Logan Center here at the campus of UChicago, we welcome Colson Whitehead, whose book, The Underground Railroad, was just picked by Oprah. It has been christened an Oprah Book Club pick. And he will be in conversation with WBEZ's Natalie Moore, author of Southside. That will be at the Logan Center, and tickets are available, again, through our website and the Logan Center's box office. That's September 13th. And lastly, I want to let you know that just today we've confirmed to look ahead, November 30th, we'll welcome Zadie Smith for her new book, Swing Time. Yeah, thank you. So we're excited about that. Nothing to RSVP or purchase for yet, but keep your eyes peeled. And if you'd like more information about the events we do here at our two stores, Seminary Co-op and 57th Street Books, please sign up at the register for our events email newsletter or do so at semcoop.com.
Thank you.
Lastly, I just want to say, if you guys are doing a great job and doing the best you can, and I know that, if you can keep the doorway as clear as you can so we don't get any Instagram comments from the fire station, that would be great. Charlene Carruthers is a black queer feminist community organizer and writer with over 10 years of experience in racial justice, feminist, and youth leadership development movement work. She currently serves as the National Director of the Black Youth Project 100.
Yes.
Let's welcome Charlene Carruthers.
Yes.
Mychal Denzel Smith is a Nobler Fellow at the Nation Institute and a contributing writer for The Nation magazine. He has also written for The New York Times, The Atlantic, Salon, Feministing.com, The Guardian, The Root, Think Progress, and The Huffington Post. And he has been a featured commentator on NPR, BBC Radio, CNN, MSNBC, Al Jazeera America, HuffPost Live, and a number of other radio and television programs. Please join me in welcoming Mychal Denzel Smith. And Marc Lamont Hill is an award-winning journalist and host of BET News, as well as a political contributor to CNN. He is a distinguished professor of African American Studies at Morehouse College. After that, he held positions at Columbia University, Temple University. He lives in Atlanta and New York City. Following tonight, if you have a book that you would like to have signed, please give us a moment to exhale and find our way to the hallway where that signing will take place. Yes. Thank you again for being here. Please join me in welcoming all our guests.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
How y'all doing?
Great.
Good. I'm so happy to be here with what I said kind of jokingly on Facebook, but two of my favorite black men in America. And you know, people don't think I like black men half the time. But I do, frankly I do, and particularly these two black men. And so tonight we're going to spend some time hearing from them about their books. You know, hopefully you've read their writing before, but I believe that these two books represent something much bigger. They're much bigger projects and consolidating not just their brilliance, but their thoughts and how they're contextualized in this particular moment that we're living in. And so I'm going to ask them some questions, but it's likely that we're going to cut up a little bit, just a little bit.
Cut up.
So let's get right into it. So my first question for you all is just to share with folks what you think your books mean in this particular moment for people, as we are not just witnessing, but also many of us are participating in what is growing into being an actual movement. What does it mean? in this particular moment? Oh, that's right. Let's do that before.
Yeah. Before we jump into all of that, we should observe today is August 9th.
Yes.
2 years ago, Darren Wilson shot and killed Michael Brown, and his body lay in the streets for 4.5 hours because Ferguson Police Department deemed him a nobody. And in honor of his life, in honor of the movement that has been formed, in response to that killing, we should observe 4.5 minutes of silence in remembrance of him.
I'll keep that on.
Thank you. And you know, I've observed that 4.5 minutes several times over the past 2 years, and it's never easier, because every silent second that ticks by, I think about the minutes and the hours that the people of Ferguson experienced, and the terror, the agony of seeing one of their own, seeing one of our own lay there and be treated as nothing. And then over the past 2 years, as we've had more videos of more of this same kind of violence be visited upon us, and even when we don't have the videos, we get the names and we get the stories. And and so, you know, in talking about what does it mean to have a book speaking to this moment right now, it's the only way that I knew how to survive it, is to write through it. The only means that I knew to make sense of it, for as senseless as it is for me the only way I knew to put forth a vision for liberation, so that we don't have any more Michael Browns lying in the street for 4.5 hours. And that we don't have any more Alton Sterlings being held down and shot on video. And that we don't have any more Corinne Gaines holding her son and trying to protect him from the police and being shot and killed. Like how do we build that world? And that's what the book is about. It's asking those questions about building the world in which all of those lives are valued. How do all of those lives be afforded the opportunity to flourish, so that we don't meet them all in death? And I don't have the answers, and I wish I did. But what I know is that each time I observe those 4.5 minutes, I have to dream again.
First, thank you all for being here, and I apologize for being late. It's such an honor to be here with my brother Michael and my sister Charlene, especially on a day like this. Michael and I just happened to have books out at the same time, and we both were kind of committed to doing something together, and we thought what better day and what better opportunity to maybe come together on August 9th to think through some of this stuff, and who better to do it with than Charlene. I met Charlene in Palestine. We went to Palestine together as part of a delegation, and it was sort of a Ferguson to Palestine delegation. And that's noteworthy to me because, you know, my book is dedicated to two people, the second of whom is Mike Brown. And I say he died so that a new generation of freedom fighters could live. There's been death before Mike Brown, there's been death after Mike Brown. Mike Brown, though, in many ways for me, marked a watershed moment in this generation's struggle. It's because of that tragedy in Ferguson, the tragedy of August 9th, that led to the organizing efforts, the activist efforts, the teaching efforts, the loving efforts that happened on August 10th, and has led to the most sustained resistance movement to police and state violence in American history. And for me, that is extraordinary. At the same time that we regret the loss of life and we mourn the loss of life, Mike Brown was a person. Not a symbol, not a representation, but a human being with a mom and dad who loved him. And we never want to forget that. But I'm also very grateful to be able to have a comrade in struggle through Charlene that I met as a product of the work that emerged out of our resistance. And to be able to think through this time with Michael, I think is incredible for me. Michael wrote a much more courageous book than I did. And I really mean that. That's not like faint praise. I do my best to never give Mychal any praise.
That's true.
He is my little brother, and it's, you know. But he wrote a book that was courageous. He had the courage to reflect on what it meant to be young and black in this moment, and to wrestle with issues in ways that others don't. And while some memoirs and critiques are self-indulgent and only look inward, he had the kind of intellectual and moral fortitude to look outward and to be accountable for his own failures, his own shortcomings, but also the brilliance to look beyond that. It's all the things that I would want a book to be if I had that kind of courage to write. And so I want to say that about Mychal. And real quick, lastly, just, you know, my goal was to try and tell that story about Mike Brown. I went down there on August 10th, and I talked to the residents who had to witness the kind of 21st century lynching that was the killing of Mike Brown, who had to watch, those babies who had to watch him lay there on the ground for 4.5 hours, those adults who saw Mike Brown grow up and would send him to the store and ask him what was going on with school and ask him what was going on with his life. The young kids who looked up to him had to watch him lay out there for 4.5 hours without even a sheet covering his body for much of that time. His blood dripping through the cracks of the concrete. 95 degrees outside, and like any lynching, the spectacle is the biggest part. The state kills you, not just so that your body can be eliminated, but so that the world can see what happens when you have the temerity to confront or challenge state power. And so he laid out there, and they watched him, an enemy of the state, a victim of state violence, lay out there for 4.5 hours. As a woman, Keisha, told me, like he ain't belong to nobody.
Right. Amen.
And that idea of not belonging to nobody is what lingered with me. And so I wanted to tell a story about Ferguson. And right as I was writing the proposal to tell a story about Ferguson, Daniel Pantaleo was not indicted for killing Eric Garner. And we were still dealing with the ghosts of Trayvon and George Zimmerman mocking us in public view. And we had to think through Freddie Gray, who was killed running away, Eric Garner, who's killed standing still. We had to deal with Rakia Boyd and Renisha McBride and Sandra Bland. And we had to make sense of all of it. And so every time I tried to tell a story about a person who died, another person died. And so I realized that this wasn't a book about Ferguson, it was a book about state violence. It was a book about a war on the vulnerable that's bigger than just what happens when they kill us with guns. It's also about what they do when they put lead in the water.
Oh, Lord.
It's also what happens when they kill us slowly. You know, when I was with Mumia and we fought to get him off death row, he said, well, they moved me from fast death row to slow death row. And I never forgot that, because Chicago Public Schools, slow death row.
That's right.
The crisis of public housing is slow death row.
That's right.
You know, this war on us and by the police is slow death row. Rape culture is slow death row.
right.
Torture even. And so to wrestle with all of that stuff is a sense of nobodiness. And I wanted to help us think through what that meant historically, what that means currently, and how we can move forward from that.
So in this particular moment where we witness, and many of us have taken part in the development of the Vision for Black Lives, a public policy agenda developed by the Movement for Black Lives. And blackness and many experiences of blackness come through that platform. And we talk about BYP 100 being unapologetically black. And, you know, we focus on black activists between the ages of 18 and 35. And, you know, we do quite a bit of work here in Chicago. And you too, like your books, particularly Mychal, we know that your book, I mean, it's right in the title, A Young Black Man's Education. And then Marc, you talk extensively about black people, right? But what do you think your books tell us about the condition of black people and blackness, period, in America in this particular moment, if anything?
Well, you know, I think that, you know, for me, the book is particularly about black male identity, right? And unpacking that not through the lens that we have consistently done it, right? Like we have a long history of, and we have like a literary canon of black men talking about the experience of black men through white supremacy and racism. And that's, it's necessary work, certainly. But what we have not had is the work of black men walking through the ways in which white supremacy and patriarchy and homophobia and mental illness and transphobia and all of these things are intertwined, and how they come to bear on the shaping of one's identity. And a project of how one unlearns, right? How one divests from those systems of oppression, particularly those that bestow upon you power and privilege, right? When you have shaped an identity on the basis of the ability to dominate others, or which then denies other people their humanity, right?
That's right.
How do you do the work of noting it, right? And then pulling yourself out of it. And so the book for me is the process of that education for black male identity, but to set forth that for everyone, I think as a blueprint of that sort of self-interrogation. And so it's for everyone who, whatever position of privilege you come from, this is a means of identifying, but not simply stopping there. And I think that that's the problem of so many different conversations around that concept of privilege, is that it stops with the identification that it exists, right? Now, if you are a person who is committed to a new vision, a radical reimagining of forms of democracy and economy and justice, at which equality is the foundation, simply acknowledging privilege does nothing, right?
That's right.
What you have to be willing to lose is the privilege. You have to be willing to step up and say, because my identity is wrapped up in this, I'm willing to form a new self because I know that the identity that I currently inhabit denies other people their human dignity. So the vision for this book, in terms of what it's saying about black folks, is that, speaking to black men, particularly cisgender heterosexual black men, that we are no longer allowed to pontificate about the evils and horrors of racism without examining the ways in which we are complicit in other forms of oppression.
That's right. All right. Thank you.
That's why I say his book is more courageous. He really is. I mean, there's something at stake. I mean, critiquing the world is one thing, right? But he's doing something different. He's willing to render his own kind of privilege and power precarious and vulnerable in hopes of killing it ultimately. And I think that's so much more interesting. I'm not good at selling books, clearly. My shit terrible, by his. No, but I do think that's important. I think what I'm trying to do is offer an analysis that gets us past the kind of moment-to-moment media cycle of Black death. Because you can get caught up in that moment-to-moment thing, and you follow the wave of, oh, they killed us here, they killed us here. Kanye said something. They killed us here. DNC. Right? No, I mean, really, like, that's literally how it happens. Frank Ocean got an album? Nope. Still no. Right. And you end up in this kind of mode of just kind of chasing, killing the killing, and calling for justice in a very particular way, which might even reinforce the role of the state in ways we might not want. And I think that all of that is significant, and some of it is necessary, but I think we needed a thicker analysis of the moment. And so I wanted to tell the story of our condition as Black people that's rooted in a deeper history, that's also rooted in analysis and critique of the state itself. I begin the book by laying out what nobodiness is. And nobodiness is about being vulnerable to state violence. Yes, it's also about being vulnerable to the kind of everyday forms of state violence that I talked about, like lead in the water, like broken schools, lack of access to housing, healthcare, food insecurity. All of this renders us nobody as well. It's about white supremacy.
Yes.
We have to acknowledge white supremacy, not just racism, but white supremacy as a kind of organizing principle of American life. And then we also have to have an analysis of what it means to live in a class-defending state. And to not think about class as simply another form of identity politics, you know, race, class, gender.
Right.
But to think about class as a kind of concrete and material and organizing thing that then helps produce the lived experiences of race, gender, sexuality, identity, etc. That does not mean, however, to be clear, that all forms of identity struggle, all forms of inequality are reducible to class. I'm not suggesting that patriarchy can be fixed through a class struggle. I'm not suggesting that homophobia can be fixed through a class struggle. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying, though, that these forms of oppression are very difficult to engage as long as we sustain a nation state that defends class at all costs. And so we have to wrestle with that stuff. And I'm saying that that's the backdrop to this. Long before Mike Brown gets killed in Canfield, there's the Normandy School District, right, which is broken. There is a system of policing that causes Darren Wilson to roll up on Mike Brown in the first place. Mike Brown doesn't get stopped for pushing a store owner. That happens later. He gets stopped for jaywalking.
Yeah.
There are 20,000 people in Ferguson, 16,000 of them have warrants. I'm gonna say that again, 20,000 people, and 16,000 of them have warrants. For you, almost all for like not unpaid tickets, jaywalking, parking, etc. So the town business
It's black people.
is criminalizing, stopping, accosting black people. But part of why that's the town business is because Emerson Electric leaves. And when Emerson Electric leaves and outsources jobs, the labor market is evaporated. So the oppression that Mike Brown feels on the ground is directly connected to a set of economic arrangements that allow white folk to go to the suburbs, which is what happened. Remember, Ferguson's like, in 1970s, like 1% black. Now it's 67, 70% black. It allows jobs to leave. Pruitt-Igoe housing project, it's a failure, right, by all accounts. Just like Taylor Holmes, just like Cabrini Green, just like Richard Allen in Philly. We're going down the list. So housing shifts change, which is why a lot of Negroes moved to Ferguson in the first place. We also see the suburbanization of poverty, because Ferguson's this is the suburbs we're talking about, right?
Right.
So all of this stuff is happening at once. So when we talk about Mike Brown and the condition of blackness, we're talking about a whole arrangement of power. And we could say the same thing about Sandra Bland, which I will talk about later. We can say a lot more about Eric Garner in Broken Windows Policing as a model. And then there's this overarching challenge of neoliberalism, which really informs every aspect of my book. And my book is in many ways a critique of neoliberalism as it plays out in state violence.
What's neoliberalism?
Thank you.
No, I'm going there. I'm going there. It's just, I usually on TV I only get like 2 minutes. And I got a racist white cop yelling at me. So I'm like, you know, talk my shit. So neoliberalism literally means, and the reason we call it neoliberalism, although it doesn't seem like a very liberal idea, is because we're talking about the liberalization of the market. It is allowing the market to be the kind of decider of all things, right? Deregulation, not regulating corporations, austerity, privatization. All of these things are markers of a neoliberal universe, but ultimately the idea is that we can marketize our problems. Problem with public school, let's privatize it. Let's put it on the market so they can compete with one another, right? The military's not working efficiently enough, let's privatize it. We'll have black water, right? We'll have privatized military, right? Public defenders always ain't working, let's outsource the contracts to private attorneys through contract attorneys. It'll be more efficient. But the problem with efficiency is that these are human beings.
Right.
And so what's faster and cheaper isn't necessarily what's best for the human body, for the human spirit, for our community, etc. And what neoliberalism also does, as I pass this mic back, is that it promotes a narrative and an ideology of individualism over collectivism. It's not just private over public. It's also individual over collective. I'm going to get mine and you got to figure out how to get yours. And so, because it's a marketplace, it's a marketplace. And so neoliberal ideology is what leads to privatized policing. It's what leads to the ticket racket in Ferguson. It's what leads to us dumping as many court cases through the system as possible. It's what leads to emergency managers in Flint as opposed to politicians. It's what leads to all of these crises that we're wrestling with. And so the book to me is saying that this neoliberal ideology has a devastating impact on everybody, but particularly on black folk, because we are the most vulnerable.
Mark usually charges $10,000 for that type of thing.
True. So the first time I was ever pulled over by a police officer was actually in North County, St. Louis. So like up the street from Ferguson. I was 22 or 23, so that was a long time ago at this point. And they pulled me over, the police officer, black police officer. They pulled me over. He cursed me clean out. I just come from canvassing for like a local candidate, a young black person who was running for office. And none of that mattered. I had a cup in my cup holder. He thought my car smelled like I'd been smoking. And I personally don't care if I had been smoking and I had alcohol in the car. What he did and his actions were completely out of order. But what stood out to me in that particular moment is that there was a young black person walking past me, and he was telling me what to do. Because I'd never personally been pulled over by the police and harassed by the police. I've been in cars with people, all of that. He was telling me not to move and all these other things. And so when we talk about like actually like running your city off of criminalizing black people, like I was in Velda City in that traffic court, packed with black folks, packed with black folks. And the ticket was eventually dropped because the police officer was like fired because he had a history of doing like engaging that kind of behavior. And that was the particular moment, the time that I lived in St. Louis for only 2 years. I'm from here, born and raised in Chicago. But the 2 years I lived in St. Louis is what turned my eyes towards organizing. And turned my eyes to, like as an actual like path. I'd been in activism since I was 18. But the decision to become an organizer came in a domestic setting, came from living and learning and working in St. Louis. And it was from there that I decided to try to figure out what it meant to like try to transform like the state of black people particularly through organizing work. But in that moment and even now, the problem that we face and the things that you all just laid out, they sometimes seem insurmountable. They seem like very, very large, very big, and difficult for us to tackle. And Mychal, you know, you admit to not having answers. But your book also asks the questions like how can you thrive as a black man, right? Like it works to answer that question. And so for folks, because we always come to these things, people always want to know the plan and whatever, what they should do afterwards. We're not going to give you a plan. That's not going to happen. But if you are someone who, particularly a black person, because you know we'll talk to black people right now, a young black person and a young black man, because that's who your book that's the place that you're coming from in your book. Where do we begin? I know that's a really big question. Or even if it's not where do we begin, where did you begin? To begin to answer, like how do I begin to chip away at this insurmountable task of thriving in the world?
Well, you and about 50 other organizations gave us a starting point,
right?
Just recently with the policy platform, and I think that that's really important to note is that people are doing this work and have been doing this work about finding solutions to this. You know, for me, where I was beginning is where I think a lot of people have to begin, because the question of identity is at the root of a lot of it. It's the fear of that loss, right? Systems of oppression are upheld because people are, in part because people are afraid of who they might be on the other side of it, right? I know who I am now. I know who I am in the context of white supremacy and patriarchy and homophobia and capitalism and transphobia. Like I know who I am now, and I know what the world looks like, and I have a general understanding of what the social order is in the mores, and like I know how to walk through the world pretty solidly, right? I'm scared of the other thing, right? Like I don't know what the other side looks like. I don't know what does it mean to build a society with that's non-hierarchical, that has equality and justice at its foundation. What does that look like? And what does it mean for everything that I've learned about the accumulation of wealth and social capital and the ways in which one goes about that? We have to rewrite rules, and like I like the rules as they are now. Like they work for me in some respects, you know. Like that's a mentality for people. So it's a question of how committed are you? How committed are you beyond the rhetoric? And if you're committed, are you willing to sit down and do that self-interrogation? And then are you willing to put it on the line and lose it? People ask me, like, what's at stake? It's like, the first thing is going to be your loss of social capital, because if you step up and you tell the truth in moments that other people are going to be uncomfortable, like you're going to catch some side eyes, you're going to be disinvited from barbecues and basketball, like all of that is going to happen because you're going to be a downer and nobody wants you around anymore. Like when you bro, do you know that joke that you just said was very offensive to trans people, and this is the reasons why? It's like, well, don't invite Mike no more. Like that, like, you know what I mean? So that's the first thing, but then it's bigger. It is about the examination of these systems that we don't even understand how like, because the mechanisms just keep going every day without like because we're cogs in the capitalist system, we like have to go to work and not pay attention to how everything is working all the time, right? So how many people in Ferguson were aware of the ways in which their economy was dependent upon their being stopped, right? And then not just that, but like the people that are being stopped are like feel the pain of it. The people that aren't being stopped, how many of them know that their economy is dependent upon this?
Right.
And how many of them are willing to call up their local representatives and their police departments and say, hey, I don't want you to do that, right? And then how many of those police departments and local officials are going to say, oh, you don't like that, and they're going to surrender all of that, right? When their salaries are dependent upon it, when their budgets are dependent upon it. How many of them are going to be willing to let that go and say we need to figure out new ways of organizing these municipalities and these different counties and our economy? And like, how many of the small towns whose entire economy is dependent upon the existence of a prison are going to be abolitionists, or not even abolitionists, are going to call for the end of the drug war? Like, how many of them are going to step up to the plate and say, because I think this is unjust, because what I think you're doing to these people is inhumane, I'm willing to let go of that? That's where it starts. It's the people that it's noting what privileges and benefits you are experiencing, and saying to yourself, I'm willing to live without them, and then putting forth the actions to let go of them. And then like, how many people are willing to do that?
I mean, thank you. So, Mark, obviously, I'm not going to ask you how to take down your liberalism. I'm not going to ask you to do that. But I do think that nobody goes into, it explores how Black people experience social death or live in a perpetual state of possibly having your life taken or experiencing violence, right? Yes. And so I'd love it if you could talk, before we go into Q&A, about what does the project of becoming somebody look like, right? Like, is it a rehumanization project? As one of the ways that the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter Network have articulated BLM as a project of that. but you've laid out so many stories of things that have happened. How does this book, because I think it does, but I'm not the person supposed to answer the question. But how is this particular project, and then what you're seeing in this particular movement, move black folks toward, or depict black folks toward a place of being somebody, somebodyness?
Yeah. That's a great question. And one thing I just want to highlight about the book real quick prior to that, although it's connected, I think, is, state violence against black women. Because I think that's another part of the erasure of the narrative of state violence against black people, is that we frame it as a narrative of black manhood. Black men are vulnerable in public, black men are vulnerable to the state, black men are vulnerable by law enforcement. And one of the things I try to do in the book in each chapter is spotlight the ways in which this also occurs for black women. And it often happens in different ways, right? But it's nonetheless. I mean, Sandra Bland would probably be alive if she were a man.
Right.
Yes, she'd be alive if she were white. Yes, she'd be alive if she had the $500 to get out of jail, which is its own kind of social evil, right? That you're exchanging money for freedom, and that and that they were wildly indifferent to her mental health circumstance, irrespective of what happened in that prison cell, that jail cell. But there's also this way in which black women and girls are especially vulnerable to the state, and once they're in the state, the level of vulnerability becomes heightened. And her failure to comport in the way that they think women should comport, her failure to respond to the police officer with complete deference, and without questioning his authority, the way that traditional standards of femininity, which themselves are obviously patriarchal, all of that shapes how the police officer responds to her, makes her get out of the car. Men ask cops why they get pulled over all the time, and they don't like it. But the response was far different when Sandra Bland asks the question. The heightened violence we see. Just last week with Corinne May, I'm out organizing, and we're literally having back and forth with brothers who are saying, yeah, but she shouldn't have had that gun. Yeah, but she should have done this. Yeah, but she should have done that. Yet when men are victims to state violence, that is not the response that we have. No one said, yeah, but Mike Brown shouldn't have done this, or yeah, but if only Eric Garner had put his arms down, or But with women, we have we question that we have an unquestioning kind of posture toward the state, and two, we find this way of re-victimizing black women and girls. And then we could even complicate that more when we talk about trans women in public space, where the public space itself and the public sphere itself becomes a criminalized space. Just being outside means you're doing something wrong. What are you doing on the corner? What are you doing walking down the street? What are you doing out at night? Things like cases like C.C. McDonald or Mia Hall, or we're going down the list. But to answer your question, I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that because I didn't feel like I was saying enough about that. And I'll answer very quickly. I think the idea of being somebody is something, we are somebody, right? Black humanity is not something that we call into question. It's something that the state has called into question. It's something that white supremacy has called into question. And sometimes we internalize that, to be sure. And I think at every moment where that has happened, there's been resistance, whether it's Sojourner Truth, right? Ain't I a woman? Whether it's the I am a man signs, whether it's people declaring Black Lives Matter, whether it's the We Are Men in the Alcatraz Rebellion, whether it's Jesse Jackson, I am somebody, right? Like,
We sounded like a two. Where is he? He in here somewhere.
All of it is our resistance to this idea that we're not full human beings. The idea that African people are full human beings is a relatively new idea in the West. And it's something that's been challenged by popular science, by medicine, by anthropology, we can go on down the list, right? And so it becomes, these are all things I talk about in the book. So all of this, I want us to reimagine. And I think we reimagine that partly by how we engage one another, right? The humanizing experience is one of engagement. It's a pedagogical one. It should happen in our classrooms. It should also happen in public life. It should happen in the music that we consume, the way that we engage one another. Michael's book is a big step towards humanization, right? Because part of what we have to do is kill the oppressor in us. Paulo Freire talks about that, right? That the project of humanization is not just for the oppressed, it's also for the oppressor. There's something dehumanizing about being an oppressor as well. I think as a practical matter, it's also about organizing. The last chapter of the book is called Somebody, because I didn't want the book to be all somber and all bad news. I wanted to say, look, over the last 2 years, we've resisted. We resisted this idea that not just about who we are, but also about what's possible. And so I mentioned BYP 100, I mentioned the Dream Defenders, I mentioned Black Lives Matter, I mentioned Million Hoodies, I mentioned the delegations to Palestine, I mentioned, you know, Moral Mondays, I talk about the Black church, you know, some sector of the Black church. Not the neoliberal gospel of prosperity Black church. Y'all talk about neoliberalism. But I'm talking about Reverend Sekou. You know what I mean? I'm talking about Michael McBride. I'm talking about a whole tradition of folk that are standing up front, sort of reminding us of what revolutionary theology could look like from one particular religious strand. I'm talking about how we use social media to tell those stories. To say her name is a way of writing ourselves back into existence. When I got to Ferguson in August, at the end of that week actually, the Quick Trip was burned down and on the ground was stenciled, "Thank you, Black Twitter." Now, Black Twitter is a corporatized space. I don't want to romanticize the social media world, but the fact that we can use it to challenge these narratives, that if I die, or if I get pulled over, if I die in police custody, all these things are ways of fighting back and resisting these dominant narratives. That's part of how, when we resist, we assert our somebodyness. When we struggle together, we assert our somebodyness. When we care about each other, we assert our somebodyness. And that's not the central theme of the book, but that is how I end the book, because I want us to remember, like Robert Kelly said, that the market is not God, you know, and precarity is not death, and that the future is in nobody's hands. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we have time just for a few questions, and I mean questions, not comments or monologues or soliloquies when people stop listening to you. But we want to take a couple questions, and just note that once we wrap up this segment of the evening, both Michael and Marc will be in the back and ready to answer to sign your books. Yes, in the yellow shirt.
Good evening. My name is Hunter Adams III. July the 14th, there was a public forum on Capitol Hill on Black mental health. And if you can see me later, I can give you the website for that. But one of the things that came out of that, there was 4 panelists, I was one, was exactly what you're talking about this evening. That for so many people, Black people in particular, they're in shock and awe of what is happening. It's unbelievable that in 2016, we see this renunciation of our humanity. And it's very difficult for people to challenge that. Petitions, protests, and so forth, they're good, but now the challenge is, and I'd like to get a comment, is that all of this needs to be scaled up. We need millions of people out here, not a few hundred, a few thousand over there in Holman Square. That's good, but it has to be scaled up. So I just want to get a response to that.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy that you mentioned Holman Square, because if you are in Chicago, you should stop by Holman and Fillmore on the west side in North Lawndale to support Freedom Square, right? Because if we and send all of the love to the Let Us Breathe Collective, particularly, and the work that they've been doing there. And right now they're doing a school supply and school uniform drive, and for the young people who've been participating in this like ad hoc summer camp and staying overnight. So please support that. Yes. Do you have a question? Okay. You have a question?
I do have a question.
Okay. All right.
I'm a kindergarten turn 3rd grade turn 5th grade teacher, and wondering how to have this conversation with my specific Latino students around what is plaguing us as people of color. How do you address this? I think this is a great conversation for high school students, college students, but what do we do in the elementary ed world?
That's a good question. I think, first of all, I think everything we have to think about all these things, right? You know, in the late 20th century, you know, the critical pedagogy movement was sort of built around reminding us that pedagogy, teaching, isn't just what happens inside the classrooms. It's not just me teaching you reading, writing, arithmetic.
Right.
It's about all the other things. Philip Jackson said that in life in schools that there's a classroom in the school. We talk about the hidden curriculum, the way in which school itself becomes a socializing place. Right? That's where you learn, you know, size order.
Yes.
That's where you learn boys don't write poems. That's where you know what I mean? That's where you learn bodies. That's where you learn these sort of really violent gender norms of like, oh, he likes you because he hit you, right? In kindergarten, right? Right. I mean, this is literally where you learn the world. So what we have to reimagine is how school itself becomes, as Peter McLaren said, a preparation for, a legitimation of, and an introduction to particular forms of social life. That means that our classrooms have to be places where we model different behaviors, where we challenge different behaviors, and we articulate different behaviors. It has to be a space of critique. So when black people get killed in the street, that has to be a space where we engage students and talk about it. Now we talk about it in ways that are developmentally appropriate.
Of course, yes.
Right. But we have to talk about it.
Right.
Right? Ask them how they feel about it. Get them to write through it. I mean, part of what Mychal said that may have kind of gone by because he said so much brilliant stuff tonight is that he didn't just write to tell his vision of the world to y'all. He wrote for sanity. He wrote to think through this for himself. He wrote as a model of inquiry. He wrote as a way of making sense of the world. And we have to no longer think of writing as just the kind of cleanup work after we're thinking, right? And we just put it all down. But to think about how our writing can be a way of making sense of the world. And for our young children in particular, getting them to write, getting them to dance, getting them to perform, getting them to engage all aspects of their creative capacity for thinking through the world is significant. And finally, get them to critique the space they're in. Why do you go into a public school and it takes you 20 minutes to get in because you got to go through all these metal detectors and scanners and dogs, and then you get in and ain't nobody stopping you from leaving, right? Like, what does that say about what the school's priorities are, right? What does it mean for all of us to be in this small learning community, which is like secret agent talk for tracking, or this special space in the school, and all the white folk over there, or all the middle class folk over there? What does it mean for us to have police dogs? What does it mean for us to have more surveillance equipment in schools than prisons in the last 5 years? What does that mean, and how can we offer a critique of that and empower them to organize? One of the things we do in Philadelphia, I work with the Philadelphia Student Union, and one of the things we do is try and create space for students to organize themselves, to resist school themselves, to challenge the norms and logics of school so that they can resist. That's the key. They have to walk away knowing that they got the keys.
They do.
Keys.
Yes, do you have a question? Yes. Okay.
So, Mark, my question, I've been a follower, fan, fanatic, whatever you want to call it.
Family, sister, family.
My question to you as a mother.
Can you come a little closer so other
Yes,
we can hear you?
Who taught you to love yourself? Like you do? Because I came for you. Because when I look at you, you're everything I would want my son to be.
That's right. That's right.
And I really want you to So don't think I was getting that's important because it's only for me. That is how we change it.
That's right.
How do we bottle this? How do we bottle this and be very honest about that? I know your whole story about Morehouse and homeless, all that. But how did you, like Malcolm said, who taught you how to hate yourself? Who taught you how to love yourself? Because I can guarantee, I can put money in the bank. Every time you're on CNN, you're going to represent. You never, Tom. It's not even in your address. You don't know what it looks like. And how can you, tell me, and I really, it's not about an ego thing. It's a place of love and
No, thank you.
Self and self-kind. So who taught you how to love yourself?
Well, first, I am far from the archetypal model of what we should be. Mychal will tell you that. Mychal will give you a list. We all are broken. I mean, part of what I have is the privilege of having a public performance. So you get to see the parts of me that work. But there's so much of me that's broken. And we spend so much of our lives trying to unlearn this stuff. I grew up hating myself too. Right? I grew up struggling too. I grew up, really trying to figure out how to be young and black and male and different in a world that doesn't always allow for that. And so it was always a challenge for me. In a lot of ways, Malcolm saved my life. The autobiography of Malcolm X didn't just change my life, it probably saved my life. It gave me a space to understand manhood differently. It gave me a space to understand the practice of reading, which I was loved to do, right? But I didn't know what to do with that because I read wrestling magazines. I also read like Judy Blume, and like I'm in the middle of North Philly in the hood reading "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret." And there's no, but there's no framework for that. You know what I mean? And so I didn't know what to do with that. You know what I mean? Like, and I struggle with that. You know, I struggle. I still struggle with patriarchy. I still had to struggle with forms of loss and abandonment in the house that, you know, probably led to me having really broken romantic relationships for a really long time. I couldn't love anybody properly because I didn't know how to. And I'm probably at 37 just feeling like I'm able to do that. But if you would ask me at 30 or anybody else at 32, they'd say, no, he ain't, no. No. So this is a project. It's a project that is never completed. We are all unfinished. So I just don't want to romanticize who and what I am. But the things that I do have that have been of benefit to me has been a few things. It's been being able to read and have models of possibility. The book is also dedicated to Michael Eric Dyson, who modeled for me what it meant to be an academic who wanted to engage the life of the mind in ways that made people better on the ground. You could use this language, you could use a PhD to help somebody. Having him there mattered to me. Having Michael mattered to me, because even though he's younger than me, like Michael is one who modeled a courageous, he and Mark Anthony Neal for me, modeled a kind of courageous black feminism that wasn't just theoretical, that could get claps and snaps on the panel, but could actually bleed into your actual life, so that you could be a better partner and a better parent and a better citizen, a better human being. I mean, I got that from Michael and Mark and other folks. So that's part of what it is for me. You know, it's about doing the constant work of and therapy. Therapy.
Thank you.
You know,
Thank you.
That's so much of who and what I am, right? Is being able to find spaces to self-correct, but then also going to places where I can get resources and support that for things I didn't even realize, my own blind spots. Sometimes as intellectuals, we think we have the world figured out, and it's our job to report on the world, but sometimes we can't report on ourselves, you know? And so finding those spaces to be better and to heal, to be whole, is what I've tried to do, and that's all I've tried to do is work. And so thank you. I appreciate your comment. I'm glad that my work has mattered to you, but I just don't want anybody to ever think that what you see on Twitter or on CNN or even on a panel is all that I am, and those broken pieces are what we're all trying to put back together again.
Thank you. We'll take one more. I saw your hand, actually, in the gray hat. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, just quickly, noticed your comment. I think it's very important you're not talking in terms of state violence. The difficulty I have two difficulties. One is, how can you not recognize the centrality of the class struggle, given the recognition of the role of state violence, particularly as it gets to the function of black populations? The second question I have is, given the critique of capitalism, it seems to me that when we talk about privilege, particularly white supremacy, we have to look at that as the illusion of privilege. White people do not gain from the fact of oppression, direct oppression of black people. It seems to me what as Du Bois pointed out, that white people themselves are victims of oppression by virtue of the illusion of white supremacy. So I mean, to me, you take the analysis so far, certainly farther than we did in the 60s, but it seems to me the same problem of failing to deal with the reality of capitalism in crisis and how it addresses that crisis through attacking the most vulnerable, through its class instrument, namely the state, police violence.
Yeah, I feel like I said that, but forgive me if I didn't, because I may not have been clear.
My question is, see, when you talk about patriarchy and all of the other ideological forms,
right,
you said that you didn't see them as subordinate to the class struggle or expression of the class struggle. You saw them like together, like the class struggle, just one more element of gender discrimination.
No. Again, let me just read this real quick. Can we take one more question? I want to get a question from Mike. But I'm just going to read this sentence, just to be clear, because I'm not always articulate. And I think when you read it, you'll see that. Nobodiness cannot be understood without an equally thorough analysis of class. Unlike other forms of difference, class creates the material conditions and relations through which racism,
all right.
sexism...
I'm going.
I wouldn't be I wouldn't be a thorough black feminist if I didn't add to that. And for me, that is actually not, like, I don't situate or orient my politics or my analysis from that place of class alone, because I don't have the benefit nor the benefit of doing that. And I think we actually do ourselves a disservice if we try to figure out if it's the chicken or the egg, because one could argue easily that patriarchy predates capitalism as a system,
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And so in our work, at least what black feminism teaches us, and various LGBT struggles, LGBTQ struggles teach us, and most importantly what black liberation struggles teach us, is that we can never just be one thing. We can never just go after a class struggle, or our struggles will be incomplete. So I'd be remiss if I didn't say that. You have a question for Michael, perhaps?
I mean, it's good if you don't.
No, it's not.
Okay, all right. We want to make sure to hear. Okay, yes.
Are we short on time, by the way? I know I can stay a little longer if we want to take a couple more questions.
Yeah, we can take
Just like, I'll write fast on the books.
Okay, word.
People been kind of
All
coming
right,
and waiting for me.
okay.
I don't want their questions to be cut short.
Okay,
That's
guys.
my
Yes.
concern.
Okay.
Waiting for
Michael,
TV's
I have a
my
question for you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because I'm in pain, so that's why I just kept raising my hand.
Okay.
Your book says the male, the young black man educated. I'm in pain because not only do I have a college-educated son, he's smart, he's caring, and he's a black male. He was down at University of Missouri when everything went crazy. He's probably going to kill me because I'm about to talk about it. But he was part of that, activism, wanted to be with the 1950. He slept in the tents and he did everything. He was on the dean's list. I'm in pain because now, after all of that, we're heading to HBCU. I'm in pain because he's in his last year, basically. So, do your book talk about the man at the college campus that's dealing with the racism? Because see, I'm mad because I'm like, why are we transferring?
Yeah.
But I'm gonna let him because I ran into someone that went to Mizzou, which he does not know this.
Yeah.
And that young brother said, I went back and spoke. You guys only know what the media said. You have no clue of what these kids are dealing with down on this campus.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna pay that extra money to go to HBCU, but I'm mad that he has to leave. And he doesn't have to, but I know as a black male mom, anything happen to mine, I'm taking a route.
Right.
Period. I'm gonna keep it real.
Yeah.
But I wanna know, how do we teach them that, and he went to go off what the man said, he was in predominantly white school for 12 years.
Yeah.
So then, and like I said, he embraced and loved everybody. He has a deep poem that will be on my Saving Our Boys page. It has, he wrote it, which I should have known something was going on. It's very deep, and it talks about some of the things he dealt with. And when I went to say this poem in front of a group, people wanted to pay to get a copy of that poem. So my point is, at the college level, how are they dealing with that?
So I went to an HBCU, so I didn't just run into that. So you're not going to find the experience of white supremacy necessarily within my college experience. In that respect, I feel your pain certainly. My experience within the book, though, is what, as much as love and appreciate and want to see our HBCUs flourishing, it's more of a critique of this sort of neoliberal respectability politics that's entrenched within those institutions on the basis of their need to survive, but also a particular strain of black political thought that has constantly tried to get us to assimilate and not to question and dismantle systems of oppression. And so that was my experience at an HBCU. So what I would get at is just that there's going to be one experience at a predominantly white school, and that's going to be a painful one. But there's going to be another, because these are flawed institutions, and they're institutions that are more interested in their own protection and perpetuation than they are always in the interest of liberation, right? So you're not going to get they're not all, like, I appreciate my time there. I got what I needed out of that I didn't get a degree, but I got what I needed out of my experience there. But yeah, so I would just say, you know, I can't speak to that experience. Is what I'm trying to say, is that mine was different, but the experience of institutions that don't always seem to have your best interest at heart is in the book. Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
This actually is a question for the entire panel. So my great aunt was the first black woman to run for Illinois State Senate in Illinois, here, clearly. She's a communist. She was a communist. Angela Davis told me that she taught her everything that she knew. When I was 8, my dad put the autobiography of Malcolm X in my hand and made me read it at 8.
Amen.
And I grew up in Trinity United Church of Christ, Jeremiah Wright, where my womanhood and my blackness was affirmed every day. Not just on Sundays, but every day. What I have found is that our kids don't know our history. They have no idea where we come from and who we are. And so I would like to hear, one, who influenced you? I heard you say Malcolm X and Michael Eric Dyson, but who influenced you guys to do the work? And two, what can we do to get that knowledge to our kids, because they have no idea where they are?
I'll be real quick. I said, you know, a bunch of people influenced me. Malcolm was literally, in terms of reading, it was Malcolm and Asada. Those were the two texts that really, like, radically changed my life. At different points, Malcolm was high school, Asada was a little bit older, I was in college. Both radically changed my political formation and my ideology. Bell Hooks has influenced me considerably. Cedric Robinson has influenced me considerably. Anything that came out of Third World Books influenced me considerably. I mean, that was my whole high school career, you know. I can go down a list of books and people who influenced me. But I think for me, the second part of your question was not just who influenced me, but how do we get that back? I think we have to support our traditions, right? Part of what neoliberalism does, and I promise the last time I use that word, is that it eliminates, like, for example, the local bookstore, right? Because you can go to Target and get your book for $18.99, or you can go to Amazon and get our books for $2 cheaper.
That's right.
So you don't go to Hakeem's in Atlanta or in Philly on 52nd Street. You don't go to Marcus in Oakland, right? You don't go to Human in Harlem. In fact, these stores are closing down because we don't take care of them. But what's inside of those traditions for me, I'm just going to speak to the literary piece, I'll let them take any other part, is the other stuff. When I went in to buy Malcolm, I turned around and found Amos Wilson, right? I'm reading Blueprint for Black Power. I'm reading, you get what I'm saying? Like, I'm finding other traditions. I'm finding other books from Frances Cress Welsing to Marimba Ani to Malefi Asante, because I'm there. So, like, but if we shut those things down and think, I'll just go to Barnes & Noble and get a Starbucks while I'm there, they're not gonna have Marimba Ani in Starbucks. You know what I'm saying? They just not. And so you're missing out on something. So support black bookstores. I mentioned Third World Press, support Third World Press, support Africa World Press, support black bookstores, support our traditions, support, you know, and in doing so, I think we'll get a lot more out of it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we obviously can run down the list of our most esteemed black writers and thinkers and say, you know, James Baldwin and Audre Lorde and you know, Patricia Hill Collins and Kimberly Crenshaw works now, and Mark has been a huge influence on me, and he mentioned Dyson and Cornel West and all of these folks that I used to watch, I know, you know, on whatever C-SPAN panel was happening about black folk at the time, right? There are all of those different things. I think also we should note that it's not always through literature per se.
Right.
That I read Souls of Black Folk because I heard Kweli rhyme about it, right? You know?
Yes.
So these are also spaces to introduce us to, like, my book's title comes from Mos Def, right? The music is a space, you know, different cultural art forms, and you know the fact that we had in my house a picture of, you know, it's like one of those cheap joints that you get at the African festival in town, and it's like Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Right? But just noting that those were figures and that was a piece of art that was important to my parents. I mean, it all happens in different spaces. It's not going to always be like, you're not going to sit down a huge tome in front of a child and they're going to go through it and understand it and accept it. Sometimes you're going to have to dissect with them Beyonce's Formation and talk about the imagery there of the American South and blackness and what she's doing with those things. And that's just as rich, you know. I think we can't dismiss that. It's all that I would say is that if we're talking about how do we get this history and this knowledge to our children, what are the things that they're already engaged with that we can open up to and talk to them on that level? What are they already understanding? What are they already interested in? And ensure that we supplement that with in their interest with the things that we want them to be interested in.
I want Charlene's answer though.
Yes.
Well, so one, I went to Beasley. Yeah, Beasley, so y'all know. So Beasley, it was respectability, but it was like black history every single day. Yes. Like every single day when I was a student there. Back in, I graduated in 93? 99. Hey, 1999. And so in addition to I went to a public school. I'm a graduate of Chicago public schools. But albeit I went to a magnet school, be clear about that, and there's a regional gifted center. And then my high school was an IB program, so I had a specialized public school education, which lets me know that it's possible. Right. I was on free lunch. My family didn't have, I was in school with folks in Jack and Jill, but we were not in Jack and Jill. My family couldn't afford that. And so I know a quality public school education is possible. So that's one, where black history is taught and blackness is affirmed. The other part is that one of my mama's friends gave me Roots when I was in the 6th grade. I don't know why this woman gave me this book, but I was about yay high. The book was bigger than me, and that's what I was reading, Roots and Queen. I know adults who haven't read Queen. So I was reading that. I was reading Toni Morrison in high school. I didn't understand half of it until later. But I was not a special snowflake. I don't think that there's something super special about me. I had a lot of people who invested in me, like my parents and my teachers. But somebody has to take that responsibility up. The kids don't just magically not know something. We have a responsibility to do that work. And it's a responsibility to commit to doing that work in whatever capacity that you can do it at. And I'm going to go back to Freedom Square, because Freedom Square is when people talk about imagining a world without prisons and police, the police are not allowed to cross the threshold into the lot of where Freedom Square is. And there are people there doing political education on a regular basis. On Sunday, myself and one of my comrades, Fresco, we led a teaching on Assata Shakur. And a part of that, we played Common Song, a song for Assata. And that was one of the moments where they were the quietest. And we printed out the lyrics too, right? And this is not our curriculum. You can go to Assata teaching on the internet and use that curriculum. We didn't create it all on our own. But it's in taking up a commitment to educating young people, because that they hear you when you say y'all don't know the history. Well, how are they supposed to learn it? I cannot say it enough that we have a responsibility to take up that work. And to know that our young people know more than we think. We often think they know. They have a bigger capacity to develop a critical analysis than we often think they can develop. And, be it videos, Eyes on a Prize, YouTube, whatever it is, those things too are educational tools. And I think it's possible, but it has to start from a place of what is my commitment? And seeing that commitment situated in the long, protracted struggle for black liberation. So, yeah. You? Yep. Last but not least.
Hi. So this is in response to Mark's recent comments, which for the whole panel. You said that we should not be afraid of a Trump presidency in terms of voting, your decision to vote Green Party. And I want to know, in this like age-old struggle between, I guess, pragmatism and you know, radicalism, I want to know, is it really fair to say that we wouldn't be worse off as a country, and to not acknowledge the, you know, the gains that we have made, you know, as allies, as a imperfect Democratic Party, imperfect progressive, like slow progress, versus say when Bush came into office through the, you know, Nader and blah blah blah, Gore debacle and the setbacks that we had there. How do you vision that a Trump presidency, if that was the likely fruition of the green vote, you know, taking off, helping us and pushing us forward? Whole panel.
And I blame myself because I asked for more questions, right? First, I would respectfully disagree with your characterization of my position. I didn't say those. I didn't say we wouldn't be worse off. I didn't say that we wouldn't. I didn't make a difference. I wouldn't disagree with any claim you make.
No,
right?
you said that the imperfect Democratic Party is almost worse than, you know.
No, I'm respectfully disagreeing with that. I didn't say that. What I said is that we've been locked into this binary of choosing between imperfect Democrats or the Republican alternative for so long, and that there might be a different political vision at play that we could say. I'm not suggesting that. I'm afraid of a Trump presidency too, right? I'm just not unafraid of a Clinton presidency. In other words, I'm scared of both of them.
Okay, thank you.
All them double negatives. Everybody running got me shook. There are a few. I'm gonna say this quickly because I feel like the last few days have been weird because I've been seeing these headlines that have been wildly mischaracterizing my position. And one was like today was like Mark supports Trump, and I'm like, how y'all get that from like what I said? My position is this: when I am a Green Party member, ally, I am working with Jill Stein's campaign. I have for the last 4 years. I voted for Cynthia McKinney in 2008. I voted for Jill Stein in 2012. I'm going to vote for Jill Stein in 2016. So this is part of a long position of building. This isn't like a reaction to Trump. This isn't a reaction to Hillary.
Sure.
This is about my understanding of what politics can look like. Second thing is, I am not opposed to people who are saying they want to build left-wing movements and vote for Hillary Clinton. I disagree with that as my own personal moral choice, but I don't have a problem with that. In fact, what I've advocated over the last year or so is strategic balloting, right? And Eddie Glaude actually has a piece recently where he talks about this. In decidedly blue-red states, vote your conscience. In contested states, vote in a way that keeps Donald Trump out of office, and then handle the down ticket items in a way that makes sense. That way, you send a message to the Democratic Party that we're not a captured elector, at least we don't want to be, right? That they have to be somewhat accountable, and we may be able to drag the party a little bit to the left ideologically, but I understand the urgency of getting Donald Trump out of office. I don't have the same shared sense of urgency as many other folk do, not because I think Donald Trump is capable or smart or talented or sane. I do think having some level of proximity to Donald Trump over the last few years and talking to him, talking to his campaign, I do believe that a great deal of what he's doing is a performance for the extreme right. He's playing to the cheap seats, and I actually don't think that who we think he is who he actually is. And as a result, I think he's projecting kind of boogeyman narrative on us that we don't actually have to be as afraid. If this were Jeb Bush, nobody would be beefing with me right now.
Right.
But it's because it's Donald Trump that there's the issue. And I'm saying that part of what you imagine Donald Trump to be is not what he actually is. And also some of his most draconian and extravagantly racist policy is also the most unworkable. Like a wall is not going to happen. Right? He doesn't even have the support of his own party.
Right.
So in many ways, I'm not as afraid of the danger down. And it's not that I'm...
Even if it was Bush.
Right.
That's so different.
I mean, Bush actually probably in some way... Anyway, that's a whole thing. But which I'm willing to have. I don't know. So there's... So that's the other piece of this. I don't operate from the same set of assumptions about who Trump is and what the consequence is. I also believe in long-term building a set of politics. Because the argument here is, what about the vulnerable, right? It's easy for you to say that in privilege, right? You know what I mean? You're middle class, Michael's upper 1%. Like, y'all ain't... This from Men's Warehouse, man. Them sneaks cost more than anything I got on. Is that you have the luxury of kind of playing out this kind of radical leftist armchair revolutionary fantasy, right? That's the.
That's what people are saying.
But
That's
the
what-
fantasy even real.
Right, and what I'm saying is I'm again dismissing the premise on its face, right? I'm saying that's not what I'm trying to do. The T-loss of my project isn't necessarily revolutionary warfare or revolutionary end goal. That's what Ambrosia.com said, right? That wasn't, and it was a Breakfast Club interview, and I said it in passing in a 47-minute interview. I've laid out much more of my process. What I'm saying is that the vulnerable are under attack under Hillary Clinton. Workers' rights are under attack under Hillary Clinton. And if you live in Syria or Iraq or Palestine, you're under far more danger probably under Hillary Clinton than anybody else. And those vulnerable people, and I want you, I appreciate the clap, but I want to make it look, I don't want her to feel as if this is against her. No, but I just don't want to create that kind of dynamic because I really want to talk to you. Thank you, though. I appreciate the 4 people that vote green with me. So if we look at this in the international context, I'm not even convinced that Hillary Clinton is an alternative. And for me, there are moral non-starters. There are non-negotiables for me. I can't vote for a candidate who believes X. I could not vote for a candidate who didn't support LGBT rights, even if they were better than the alternative. Right? Just because that's a moral non-starter for me. For me, drone attacks is a moral non-starter. Supporting the occupation of Palestine is a moral non-starter. So I can't do that. Again, I understand people have different politics, and again, that's why I say strategic balloting. Right? But I do care. I do care about the vulnerable, and I hope that's a more clear answer of my position on green. But I do believe that we need an alternative to the Democratic Party, because as they move to the right further and further, we have this almost corrupt, we have this profoundly corrupt idea of what the left looks like anymore. So that we go to the Democratic Convention and they're talking about American exceptionalism and patriotism and all this. I mean, like, it's easy for Melania to jack somebody's speech if they all saying the same shit, right? At some point, we need a real left. We need a real left, and my job, I think, is to help fight for that. In any way, and we're all trying to do that in different ways. And I respect people who do that, and I just hope that we all can have that kind of
So you
dialogue.
don't think the left can be built within the current Democratic Party?
No.
No.
No, I don't. And I don't think racism can be ended by joining the Klan and fighting from the inside. I mean, I think there are moments where you have to operate outside.
Where the numbers are, how do we build?
So here's the thing. This is something that I think is extremely important, is that, numbers, so this is an argument that folks often make about the so-called emerging majority of brown and black people. I hate that term. I don't believe in the emerging majority, emerging minority, or any of those things, right? Well, just because numbers don't equal power or influence on their own, right? We often talk about Frederick Douglass and, power concedes nothing without a demand, but it won't concede to anything without an organized demand. So you can have all the people that you want, but if folks aren't articulating and believing and committing into a set of shared values that is left, like it's moving us farther and farther left, then it ain't gonna work. I do not believe that the Democratic Party will actually, unless a miracle, maybe I can jinx it, will ever be a transformative political party. I don't think it has the capacity to do that in any time soon. However, no. The answer is no. And how I situate myself as an organizer, and how BYP 100, how we situate ourselves is not in the framework of an elected official or a party. We situate our building of power around issues, what we actually want to move forward, what our agenda is. And if you ain't with it, then you have to go, right? And if you are with it, then maybe we won't set a club up on you every single week. That's really what it is. Because one thing that Alicia Garza has articulated that I'm still digesting is that what will happen in November is we can determine what type of terrain we're going to fight on, right? And I think there's some credence to that. In determining what type of terrain we're going to fight on. But what's on that ballot is not just the 2 presidential candidates. We're here in Chicago, right? In the state of Illinois. And we have lots of battles coming up outside of the presidential campaign. And so in this moment, my call to action for folks is, if you don't have the muscles around electoral politics, if you don't, in an organization or as an individual, we have a lot of battles coming up. Build those now. Use this this moment as an opportunity to build those muscles up around your analysis, around your base, resources, things like that, for the battles that are to come, so that we can actually, like for me, I'm invested in building independent black political power. And Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or Rahm Emanuel or any of the aldermen here, most of in the city of Chicago, can do that for us. It's a much longer and broader struggle. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for your response.
Yeah. Michael, you want to close? Or you? No?
What am I supposed to add? Thank you and good night.
So as we close up, I want to thank everyone for coming here tonight. I'm going to reiterate to support Freedom Square. Check out the Let Us Breathe Collective Facebook page. You have to go out there. If you want to see what a real Beyond Prisons and Policing looks like, that is youth-centered, please go there and support the work that's happening. Rachel, I know you got something. What?
No, you can for Freedom Square Pacific, they have Freedom Square Facebook page.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Freedom Square Facebook page to support that. Buy Michael's and Marc's books. Do that. Do that tonight, now, and tell your friends to buy them as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.